Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday evening worship service here at Victory Baptist Church. It is Sunday, March the 29th, 2020. It is currently 5:59 p.m. Central Time. Started about a minute early, but just to give everyone a chance to tune in. So welcome. Yes, we are live streaming. Yes, I'm sitting in an empty building. Yes, I'm not using my wireless microphone. Yes, I've continued to try all kinds of different ideas to hopefully produce things that will be beneficial to those who tune in, whether you're listening to us live or if you're listening to us via, a podcast app somewhere later on. You're listening to a recording of this. Thank you for listening. We greatly appreciate it. But we do hope that, the next hour will be beneficial for everyone. So let's begin this evening worship service with two hymns for members of Victory Baptist Church. The lyrics of the hymn are posted. There are links to the lyrics in the Slack chat channel, so feel free to look at them and follow along. All right, so let's begin this evening. Listen carefully. Get everything situated. You may want to have your Bible open to Isaiah chapter 55. Tonight will be a little different. This morning was very heavy doctrine, theology, and raised a lot of questions. Tonight will be more devotional in nature. I always like to balance it out and mix it up, but hopefully it will prove to be beneficial. And this will be one of those situations where what you do with what I give you this evening will determine how useful and beneficial it is. But hopefully you will do something with it. So let's begin with two hymns this evening for our Sunday evening worship service.
This is
All right. Before we get started this evening, Isaiah 55 is what you'll want to have open with your Bible. If you can do that, that would be great. Just for the members of Victory Baptist Church, those who are listening here in the local area, Abilene, Texas, Ovalla, Texas, Taylor County area, just remember tomorrow, I think it's 11:15 or 11:30 a.m., Abilene will be holding the officials in Abilene, city officials will be holding a press conference, probably going to issue a shelter-in-place order of some kind. It's supposed to be a limited one. We don't know exactly what that will entail. I did not check any headlines today to determine if there's been any new information given. So just make sure we are paying attention to that. If an order is issued, I know it could greatly impact people's lives. If there's something anyone needs, if there's any problems, anything you need, just let me know, and I'll do anything I can to try to help meet that need, to do anything I can to help out. Make sure you check on each other. Just make sure everyone is okay. They have things that they need. If you become aware of a need, because sometimes the people with a need won't say what the need is, and then someone else will find out that they have a need, then you just let me know. You be the narc. Okay? This is a time being a narc is okay. Be a narc and let me know what needs someone has, and we will do what we can to meet that particular need. All right? And just continue to pray for one another, and just any prayer requests, you can put them in the Slack channel, and then people can pray for those situations. So just continue to be informed, be safe, make wise decisions, look out for one another. All right. As I said at the beginning, this morning was lots of doctrine, lots of theology, dealing with some issues that have divided Christians throughout church history, getting into the subject of baptism, getting into the subject of infant baptism. That unlocks a door that you could spend years on, just going over this and fighting about this and arguing about that. I was reading from a book today on Puritan theology. They have a section there on baptism and how the Puritans viewed it. And they were talking about how this was such a dominant debate in the 17th century. And you could just argue and argue and argue. And sometimes, no matter what argument is presented, it's not going to really change much. It's not going to do much. Typically, people have kind of their ideas, their minds kind of made up on this subject. And sometimes what you have to do is you can chase rabbits for years, looking at like, okay, what about this and what about this and what about that? And sometimes you just have to ask yourself, what is what do you feel is the clear teaching just from a general reading from Matthew to Revelation? Is the subject clear, or does it require all of this trying to figure this out and figure that out? That sometimes is a way to address the issue. I did go back and look at the Didache, which is one of the earliest Christian writings, and clearly they expected those who were baptized to fast for a day or two, which clearly seems to imply that at least at the time of the Didache, that's seeming to speak of someone who has believed and is baptized. So I think that's an interesting document. Now, we know by the time we get to the 200s, infant baptism is now becoming the dominant practice. So just something to think about. And it's a big subject, and I understand that we could spend years on it, and we'll have to move on to some level. But at least it got you thinking about, and it got you bringing up the subject of a sacrament versus an ordinance and where we fall in. So hopefully a lot to think about, and there was a lot of good discussion, a lot of good questions. People provided good information. Patrick sent me a long thing with some good information, some good thoughts. I greatly appreciate that. And that's the goal, just to continue to think and struggle. But I also like to balance things out a little bit, right? Sometimes we go heavy with theology, and then sometimes we like to balance it out with something more practical. So the original goal tonight was to do something far more devotional in nature. So this will be devotional in nature, but this is going to be where I'm going to present to you, and if you see the title here, 21 things, right? And I know long-term members of Victory Baptist Church are probably going, oh no, he's going to cover 21 things? Well, kids, we're not going to bed tonight because this sermon is going to be 12 hours long. No, I don't know. I hope it's not. I'm going to give you these 21 things and kind of just like a list, like here's number 1, here's number 2, number 3, and not really have the opportunity to talk about each one, which is frustrating, but if I can make it through all 21, then you're going to be handed something that hopefully will prove to be very beneficial. But as you can tell, if I don't hurry up, we're never going to finish, right? So Isaiah 55 is where I want to begin. Isaiah chapter 55, which is a very important passage, and it reminds us of something very important, all right? Now, I know there's a lot of things we could talk about here, but let's just look at it. Isaiah chapter 55, verse 8. All right. And well, we can go back to verse 6. I know, here we go. We're going to get ourselves in trouble. Isaiah chapter 55, verse 6. Seek ye the Lord while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy upon him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. Now, here is a very important passage. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. Now, this is a very important truth, and sometimes we forget this, all right? Our thoughts are not God's thoughts. God's thoughts are not our thoughts. God's ways are not our ways. Our ways are not God's ways. There is a massive difference and conflict between us and God. There is something radically different that we have to constantly remind ourselves. Just think about it this way. He is infinite. We are not, all right? He is infinite. We're finite. He's infinite. We're finite. That's just very important. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows the end from the beginning. We definitely do not. In fact, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and we typically have already forgotten what happened 30 minutes ago, all right? But he knows everything. All right, he's all powerful, all wise. He knows the wise, and we're walking around grasping for wisdom. He's eternal. He's all powerful. He is all wise. He's omniscient. He knows everything. He's eternal. His perspective is eternal where our perspective isn't. And so this puts us in a very, when you become a Christian, this is one of the most profound things you have to come to grips with. Your way of thinking is wrong. Your ways are wrong. Everything that you think, everything that you perceive is wrong, and that's why we need a renewing of our minds. We need a constant renewing of our minds because our way of seeing things, our perception, our understanding is flawed. Sometimes what happens is we become a Christian, and instead of when you become a Christian, you literally come, in a sense, figuratively speaking, face to face with the eternal, face to face with the all-knowing. And that should break you and humble you. But what we have a tendency to do is we become a Christian, we gain a little bit of knowledge, and then we sometimes are filled more with pride than we are with humility. We have to constantly realize how much we do not know. We have to constantly see ourselves in light of God. We have to see, if we see ourselves in the light of God, then we do as Isaiah does, woe is me, I am undone. When we see God as we see God as he truly is, then we see ourselves as we truly are. We see our weakness. We see our frailty. We see our foolishness. We see our lack of wisdom. But sometimes we take a little bit of spiritual knowledge and then we think we have it all figured out. And it's a constant struggle within Christianity. This is a reminder, hey, your thoughts are not God's thoughts. God's thoughts are not your thoughts. Your ways are not God's ways. God's ways are not your ways. I think that's very important. Verse 9, that's Isaiah chapter 55, verse 8, verse 9. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Now, he's getting ready, in this context, there's getting ready to be some information about how God is going to deliver them from captivity. Ultimately, we could connect this to Babylonian captivity, how they're going to be restored, a covenant being made with Israel. We could get into and we could get into some eschatology. But let's just remind you that everything that God was going to do, his promises, the things he was going to do, went beyond anything they could comprehend, went beyond maybe what they could perceive, was far different than anything they could imagine. One commentary puts it this way, so that you kind of get the context of what's being spoken here. This is from the Pulpit commentary. A fresh assurance or deliverance from Babylon. Man can scarcely conceive of the deliverance which God designs, but God's thoughts are not as man's. God's word, once pronounced, is potent to effect its purpose. Deliverance from Babylon, having been promised, will take place and will be accompanied by all manners of spiritual blessings. Though man is made in God's image, yet the nature of God in every way infinitely transcends that of man. Both the thoughts and the acts of God surpass man's understanding. Men find it hard to pardon those who have offended them. God can pardon and pardon abundantly. Man cannot conceive of coming changes when they pass certain limits. God knows assuredly what changes are approaching, since they are his doing. And you'll see if you continue in Isaiah chapter 55. Look at verse 10. Isaiah. So he reminds them that his thoughts are not your thoughts, his ways are not your ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Verse 9, verse 10. For as the rain cometh down, and the snow from heaven, and returneth not thither, but watereth the earth, and maketh it bring forth and bud, that it may give seed to the sower and bread to the eater. There's this way of working that may not make any sense to us, all right? Now listen, this is very important. There's the way this works, we have to figure it out. Sometimes it may not make sense to us, but listen to verse 11. So shall my word, this is God speaking, be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the things whereto I sent it. Now, this very much has something to do with their deliverance. God is sending out his word, that how they're going to be delivered, and it will happen the way he calls for it to happen. It's going to happen the way he calls it to occur. All right. So, but the primary focus I want us to get from Isaiah 55, without getting into a whole study of the chapter, is that we are constantly confronted as Christians with things that sometimes don't make sense, with things that are beyond our understanding, with ideas and thoughts that go against, well, maybe even our common sense. So here's a word I want you to write down. I want you to write down the word paradox. Paradox. If you look up paradox in the dictionary, we read this: a paradox, a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement or proposition that, when investigated or explained, may prove to be well-founded or true. It's an interesting concept. Again, the word paradox, a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement or proposition that, when investigated or explained, may prove to be well-founded or true. Paradox. I think the Christian life is a life where we are confronted with the idea of a paradox over and over and over again as we read the scriptures. We're confronted with paradoxes. The Christian life is a life of paradoxes. We find ourselves facing another one and another one and another one. In fact, what I want to do is give you 21 paradoxes. Now, we can have a big discussion here, but what I'm going to do is give you a list of 21. I did not create the list, so I'm not saying that I agree necessarily. Like some of them, I'm like, well, that's kind of a paradox. Is it a paradox? Does it reach the definition of a paradox? But I will present them as they presented them. Well, not really. I'll present them I'm just going to present the list. I may present some things they say. We're not going to really have time to get into much of what they have to say, but I want you to think about this. And here is the goal. Here's the goal. I want to make sure we understand clearly my purpose here. I want you to be confronted with the reality that God's ways and God's thoughts are not your ways, and God's thoughts are not your thoughts. His ways are not your ways. His thoughts are not your thoughts. I want that to be more than a theory. I want it to be more than theoretical. I want it to have a profound impact on your life. We're always trying to figure out God. We're always trying to figure out how God thinks and what God is doing. This week, I did a Theological Central, a Theology Central podcast episode, if I can speak right tonight, where we looked at this concept of the coronavirus being the finger of God. And we played an entire segment from a radio show where they were quoting from J.C. Ryle, okay, a pastor, theologian, lived in the 1800s. And that J.C. Ryle in the 1800s, there was the great cattle plague of the 1800s in England. And J.C. Ryle was basically saying, hey, this is the judgment of God. God is bringing this upon us because our nation is sinful, right? And so this radio show from 2020, from last week, they took what J.C. Ryle said and said, the coronavirus is from God. This is judgment upon our nation. And they spoke emphatically. They spoke dogmatically, as if they knew for sure. And sometimes we speak as if we've got it figured out. Remember Job. He was a perfect man, right? Upright in all of his ways. And great tragedy befell him. Horrible tragedy befell him. And remember, his friends thought they had it figured out. They thought that they understood. They thought they knew God's ways. They thought they knew God's thoughts. Job even begins to question. And when you get to the end, Job has all of these questions. And when it's all said and done, as far as Job is concerned, he's never given an answer. He's got questions, but guess what he discovers? He doesn't know. And the only reason we can act so morally superior to Job and morally superior to his friends, thinking that we're so much better than everyone in the book of Job, is because we get to read the beginning of the book of Job where we're given the information. But trust me, if we're really fair with the book of Job, when we read the first part, to me, in some ways, we're more baffled than Job is because we are given insight to what God is doing, and it doesn't seem to make any sense. We're like, wait. So God just said, hey, Satan, don't know what you're doing today, but have you considered my servant Job? Yeah. Hey, take a look. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, you don't think he'll follow me. Well, here you go. Just go cause all the suffering you want. And you're kind of like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. What is that all about? What's going? And so then we'll write books going, well, God did this because he wanted to do this for Job. And we fill in all the reasons. We fill in sometimes the reasons that God himself doesn't even state in the book of Job, right? We will write entire Bible study guides on how to understand Job, speaking for God on God's behalf. Because sometimes we think that we know better than even God. But his ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. That's why as a Christian, this is so critical. We have to be humbled. I'm just going to give you some practical things before we look at these paradoxes. You need to be humbled by this reality that God's ways are not your ways. God's thoughts are not your thoughts. You need to be humbled by that. We need to remain in a position of humility and teachability that we can be humbled and we can be taught and we can learn. We have to. And it doesn't matter how long you've studied. It doesn't matter how long you have studied. You have to do that. You have to. I'm telling you, you have to remain that way. And it's hard. The more knowledge we get, the less humble we become. And what should happen is the more knowledge we get, the more humble we should grow. That's how it should work. So I want you to. I really want that for us this reality to humble us. I think that's very important. Number two, I want it to remind you. This idea that God's ways are not our ways, God's thoughts are not our thoughts. And when we look at these paradoxes, I want this to also challenge you to go, man, I'm not gonna think like God, and I'm not gonna follow his ways unless I spend a lot of time meditating and thinking on his word so that I can renew my mind. We're in a never-ending process of renewing our mind. If we don't get a renewed mind, then we walk around not thinking anywhere close to like God thinks and not walking in his ways, because we're going to just redefine everything in our way and our way of thinking. And that's why sometimes you'll hear Christians talk. Doesn't matter if it's about the coronavirus, doesn't matter if it's about politics, doesn't matter what it is. You're kind of going, well, I don't know if that's biblical thinking or worldly thinking. But sometimes we think that we're thinking the way God thinks. Well, are we? We've got to be confronted. So I want you to see some of this. So let's go through some of these paradoxes. Are you ready? Here we go. We got to go quick. What time is it? Yeah, 30 minutes. This is a joke. Here we go. All right. We're going to go as fast as we can. All right. The first one, I want to look at I'm going to try to look at as many of these scriptures as we can. I'm just not going to be able to comment on them. The first one I want you to look at is Matthew chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23, let's go to verse 11. All right, Matthew chapter 23, verse 11. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. Matthew chapter 23, verse 11. Now this is seeming paradoxical. This seems confusing. That the greatest among you shall be your servant. Now, that's not the way we think. I'm going to start preaching these. Okay, but he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. Verse 12. And whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased. And he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. Matthew 23:12. Whoever will exalt himself shall be abased. And he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. There is a principle there that's seeming contradictory, seeming to make no sense. This list that I have in front of me, they put it this way. Here's the first paradox. The way up is the way down, and the way down is the way up. The way up is the way down, and the way down is the way up. If you lift yourself up, you're going to be brought down. However, if you humble yourself, lower yourself, then you're going to be lifted up. But once you're lifted up, are you brought back down? Like, how exactly does that work? It's a paradox. But the concept is very real. It's very opposite to the way we think. We fight for ourselves. We exalt ourselves. We push ourselves forward. We think, no, we want people to serve us, okay? If we're going to be great, you think if someone is great, then people serve them. But it's being a servant. It's humility. It's humbling yourself. That's how you are exalted. That goes against every concept the world has. That goes against everything. That goes against every movie, every song. That goes against everything inside of us. But this is a paradox that you have to grasp. This is a concept that you have to grasp, and it should force you to be humble, because you're like, wow, that's not my way of thinking. And it should make you realize I need my mind renewed more than just today, every day. Right? So paradox number one. The way up is the way down, and the way down is the way up. Now, if you want to reword these in your own way, feel free to. I'm gonna borrow a lot from how they worded them, but I may change them. So just any way you want to word them, that's okay. The way up is the way down, and the way down is the way up. Number two, look at Matthew chapter 10, verse 39. Matthew chapter 10, verse 39. All right, we'll go back to 38, because I think sometimes you need the previous statement in some of these to really grasp the full implication of the paradox. Matthew chapter 10, verse 38. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. Now, taking a cross means taking up an instrument of death. Right? Now, taking up an instrument of death doesn't seem to be conducive to following anyone, right? It seems to be a paradox. Wait, you want me to die so that I can follow you? Typically, dying doesn't lead to following. Dying just leads to being dead. But here's the concept. No, take up your cross. Take up a cross. take up an instrument of death. It's not the way we think. We don't die to self. We love self. Isn't that our culture? We exalt self. We praise self. We want others to praise self, right? Let's continue here. Chapter 10, verse 39. And this is very important. Chapter 10, verse 39. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. Now, this is the way they describe this one. The one who finds his life loses it, and the one who loses his life finds it. That's a crazy concept to think about. Right? Let me read that again. The one who finds his life loses it. Find your life. Find your life. Your life. What your purpose is. What you want to do with your life. Your life. Your life. Your life. We talk a lot about our life, right? About our life and everything about our life. But if you really want to find life, if you truly want to find life, you've got to lose it. The one who finds his life loses it. The one who loses his life actually finds it. Now, in what concept do you find something by losing it? Hey, I can't find this. Well, you need to lose it. Well, I've lost it. Well, then you should find it. Okay, like it's a paradoxical kind of statement, but it's a radically different approach to life. It's not our way, definitely. It's not our thoughts, definitely not. So a Christian lives a life of a paradox. I'm going to humble myself, and God will exalt me. I'm going to lose my life, and I will find it. So walking around humbling yourself, walking around losing your life. Not fighting for your life, not holding on to your life, not clinging to your life, but losing it. Let's go to number 3. The third one. Now, this one, you'll have to kind of think about this one. The text here is not explicit with the paradox, but I know what they're implying, and you can hopefully you may agree or disagree. And if you disagree with them being truly a paradoxical statement, don't write it down. You can just, we don't have to get into an argument about whether something's paradoxical or not. But I understand what they're saying here. Go to number 3. Go to Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 and 29. Here we go, very famous passage. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. All right, so here's an invitation. Come to Christ, all of those who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. There's an invitation to come. It's those who are laboring, those who are burdened down, and it's like, I'm going to give you rest. And you're like, yes, I need some rest. How do I get this rest? Take my yoke upon you. Learn of me. I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, this seems paradoxical. The way to get rest is by taking on a yoke? If an animal needs rest, you take off the yoke, right? If an animal needs rest, you remove the yoke. But for the Christian, the way to truly gain rest is to take on a yoke. So we would think, no, I want rest. I'm burdened down. And he's like, no, take my yoke. Oh, no, I don't want any yoke. I want rest. I don't want a burden. I want rest. No. A yoke implies, no. That implies labor. That implies work. Man, I want rest. Yeah, but to get my rest, you got to take on my yoke. Well, that doesn't make any sense. What kind of craziness is this? This is the way they list this paradox. They list this paradox this way. An animal has rest when the yoke is off, but we find rest under a yoke. An animal has rest when the yoke is off, but we find rest under a yoke. Now that's important. We find rest under a yoke. Sometimes we talk about rest, we talk about peace, but our rest comes from being under a yoke. But that's a radical way of thinking. We don't like that. I don't want to be under a yoke. Break the yoke, rise up and fight the man, right? No. Oh, wait, submit, humble myself. Give up my life, take on a yoke. Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful life. I mean, that's the Christian life. Humble yourself, be a people's servants. Well, that doesn't sound fun. Give up my life. Wait, give up my life? I'm fighting for my life. Okay? I'm fighting for my rights. No, just give up your life. Lose your life. I don't like that. Okay. Oh, I want take on a yoke. Take on a yoke. See, this is a radical different approach to Christian life. You should really write these things down and think about how these should impact Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They should impact every aspect of your life. And trust me, sometimes these things are nowhere close to if we all live this way, the world would look at us going, what is wrong with them? But we live a lot like they do, which is we shouldn't be, right? Now, this next one is not, I struggled with this one. When I first came across this list, I've been looking at this for a couple of days, and I keep like, okay, I think I understand this one. This one I struggled a little bit with, but I think we can see it. Go to Romans chapter 6. Romans chapter 6. There's at least a principle here to consider. Romans chapter 6, we'll start in verse 15. Romans chapter 6, verse 15, all right? What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law but under grace? God forbid. Romans chapter 6, verse 15. People, anytime Paul teaches his teaching about God's grace and about salvation, people are always like, okay, well, then I can just sin all I want. That's a constant. Obviously, people understood that he seemed to be implying this salvation by grace alone through faith alone. They always want to ask this question, well, hey, can we continue to sin? And God forbid. Now look at verse 16. Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. But God be thanked that you were the servants of sin, but you have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered you. Being then made free from sin, you become the servants of righteousness. Please note this idea of yielding in verse 16. Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom you obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. Now, I know it's a little wordy, especially in the King James there, but I'll just give you the basic concept, and then you can kind of look on those verses a little bit more. Now, listen, the believer, this is a concept, and you can really just write this down and really think about this, and we may need other verses other than Romans 6 to really flesh this one out, but here's kind of the paradox that they see in these verses, that the believer conquers by yielding. The believer conquers or overcomes by yielding to something. Like we yield ourselves, we submit ourselves, and then that's how we overcome a sin or overcome different difficulties. It's by yielding ourselves. We yield ourselves. If we yield ourselves to God, then we can have victory over sin. If we yield ourselves to sin, then obviously, we're going to serve sin. But the way to victory, the way to conquering it is yielding ourselves, which seems like a paradox because instead of yielding, you think we should focus on the fighting. We should focus on the struggling. But it seems to focus on the yielding, right? Now you can really think that one through. Again, I don't have time to go through all of these, but the believer conquers by yielding. The believer conquers by yielding. That's number 4. So let's go through these again. Number 1, the way up is the way down, and the way down is the way up. Matthew 23:12. Number 2, the one who finds his life loses it. The one who loses his life finds it. Matthew 10:39. Number 3, an animal has rest when the yoke is off, but we find rest under a yoke, Matthew 11:28-29. And number 4, the believer conquers by yielding, right? The believer conquers by yielding, all right? Number 5, go to Matthew chapter 10. All right, Matthew chapter 10. Let's go to verse 42. Some of these may be a little redundant, but sometimes having a little bit of something being a little redundant can help you memorize it. Okay, is it Matthew chapter 10? Let me look here. No, Mark chapter 10. All right, like that doesn't make a bit of sense. Okay, Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10. Here we go. Mark chapter 10 will start in verse 42. Mark chapter 10, verse 42. Oh man, we could go all the way back to verse 35 and really dig into this one, but we'll start in verse 42. Mark chapter 10, verse 42. But Jesus called them to him and saith unto them, you know that they which are accounted to rule over the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and their great ones exercise authority upon them. But so shall it not be among you. But whosoever will be great among you shall be your minister, and whosoever you will be the chiefest shall be the servant of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. Now, we've already kind of seen this concept a little bit. They're going to state it this way. This is very important. The person who will be greatest must be a servant of all. Mark chapter 10, verses 42 to 45. Now, if we really go back and take that story apart, because Jesus is really responding to a situation there, it even has more power, but he's making it very clear that, hey, this is the way it works in the Gentile world. It's not to be that way among you guys. Or we could translate it, this is the way it works in the lost world. It's not to be that way among you guys. Okay, it's not to be that way among you. For the church, listen, if we're to really live out these paradoxes in the Christian life, and we're really to understand them, we're to really put them into practice, then guess what everyone in the church would be trying to be? The servant of all. They would try to be serving everyone. They would be worried about everyone else. They'd be focused on everyone else. They wouldn't be focused on self. This is a very important principle. Self. Listen, self is the enemy to the Christian life. Self is the enemy to the church. Self is the enemy to your spiritual life. Self as far as pride. Self as far as keep grabbing onto your life and focusing on your life. Self as far as you trying to please yourself. Self as you're trying to have your way. Self, you're trying to have your thoughts. Self is the enemy. Self is the enemy to your spiritual life. Self is the enemy. It's really the enemy to everything. If you think about it, self always destroys everything unless you're just going to just get away from everyone and only live a life serving yourself. But even then you'll start probably using people and hurting people. So you'll still end up hurting someone. Self, it's the enemy. And Jesus is like, hey, don't be like the Gentile world. Don't be like that. They want authority, exercise authority. No. You don't worry about authority. You're not trying to get authority. You're not trying to exercise authority. You want to serve everyone. Yeah, that's a radically different approach. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, Romans chapter 6. Go back to Romans chapter 6. Romans chapter 6. Now they're gonna kind of go back to the one that we've already looked at. We've looked at that one that the believer conquers by yielding in Romans 6:16 through 18. Now we're going to look at Romans chapter 6, 17 to 22. All right, Romans chapter 6, 17 to 22, and there we read these words. Romans chapter 6, 17 to 22. But God be thanked that you were the servants of sin, but you have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered you. Being then made free from sin, you became the servants of righteousness. I speak after the manner of men because of the infirmity of your flesh. For as you have yielded your members servants to uncleanliness and to iniquity unto iniquity, even so now yield your members servants to righteousness unto holiness. For when you were the servants of sin, you were free from righteousness. What fruit had ye then in those things whereof you are now ashamed? For the end of those things is death. But now being made free from sin and become servants of God, you have fruit unto holiness, and the end everlasting life. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Now, they're going to expand this idea that they've already given us. Remember, number 4 was the believer conquers by yielding. Well, here for number 6, they state it this way. We are made free by becoming Christ's slaves. We are made free by becoming a slave. We are made free by becoming a slave. We are made free by becoming a slave. Again, it's a paradox. Wait, I want freedom. If you don't say, well, hey, you want freedom. Well, the way to have freedom is you have to become a slave. Forget that. What are you talking about? That's crazy. Nobody wants that. Forget that. That's insane. No, that's the way. So as a Christian, if you truly want freedom, spiritual freedom, if you truly want freedom, if you truly want spiritual victory, you have to become a slave. You have to become a servant. You're serving everyone else, right? Instead of exalting yourself, you're serving everyone. Instead of going for authority, you're serving all. To try to become the greatest, you have to serve everyone. Well, if you want true freedom, you've got to be a servant, a slave. Are you a slave? Do you see yourself as a slave? Do you act like a slave? Do you live as a slave? We say, no, I don't. I live my life my way. So let's go through these again. Oh, we're running out of time. 6:47. Oh, no. Okay, well, if we have to stop, we have to stop. That's okay. I definitely don't want to go longer than I have to, all right? I can possibly come back and finish this tomorrow and a devotional message and finish this. If I do this tomorrow, I will record it for the VBC and not the Theology Central podcast. So that's where it'll be if you're looking for it. So let's go through these again. All right, here we go. Number 1. Here's these paradoxical statements that kind of give us some insight to the Christian life and kind of tells us, tries to humble us, show us that we need a renewing of our mind. These should be really challenging to you. Here's number 1. The way up, it's the way down. The way down is the way up. Matthew chapter 23, verse 12. Number 2, the one who finds his life loses it. The one who loses his life finds it. Matthew chapter 10, verse 39. Number 3, an animal has rest when the yoke is off, but we find rest under a yoke. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 and 29. Number 4, the believer conquers by yielding. Romans chapter 6, verses 16 through 18. Number 5, the person who will be the greatest must be a servant of all. Mark chapter 10, verses 42 to 45. Number 6, we are made free by becoming Christ's slaves. Romans chapter 6, verse 17 to 22. All right, now I know I could go ahead and do one more, but I'm not. I'll save it for tomorrow. Hopefully, you'll listen to what I do tomorrow. Again, it will be posted under the VBC podcast. I'll come up here tomorrow and do that. Even if we get a shelter-in-place order that does impact me, I'm assuming it won't go into effect till almost midnight Monday night. So that's when we'll worry about that then. But Monday during the day, I should be able to come up here and knock a few things out. So there you go. What do I want you to do with this? This is what I want you to do with what I have given you this evening, and I think it's very important. I want you to think meditate, think upon these paradoxes that are in the Bible, and I want you to take them to heart. I want you to really consider them, because I think in them we better understand God's will for our lives as believers. I think we get an understanding of God's will. I mean, you should write those paradoxes down. Put them on the refrigerator. Put them somewhere. Talk about them as a family. Think about them. You talk about some of these would be very great, especially if everyone gets locked in their house for 14 days and nobody can leave. You're all living with one another. These paradoxes are very critical to how to live in the midst of that, right? Because you're not exalting self. You're humbling yourself. You're serving other people. You're not fighting for your way. You're losing your life. Okay, you're taking on a Christ yoke. You're being his servant. You're serving others. You're serving him. You're being his slave. A slave doesn't run around screaming and yelling about their way. They don't. And these are, and again, look, I am not preaching this in any way, shape, or form, or speaking of this in any way, shape, or form, thinking that any of us, including myself, have ever really displayed this probably in any meaningful way more than for 5 minutes. We fall so short of this, and that's why we need Christ. That's why we are saved by grace alone through faith alone. But this is what these paradoxes is God's way of showing us, hey, my ways are not your ways. God bringing Israel, they go into captivity for 70 years and then bringing them out. And the way he brings them out goes completely probably against the way they thought and the way they understood things would work. If you go throughout the Old Testament, God is constantly doing things. You're like, that just seems so odd. And why is he doing it that way? Why is he doing it that way? Because his ways are not our ways. When we look at what's happening in the world, sometimes we don't really understand what God is doing. But here in the scriptures, he gives us some paradoxes that we are to embrace that may not make any sense. They may seem contradictory. They may seem confusing. They may seem foolish. But you have to embrace them. And until you embrace a biblical way of thinking, then you're going to constantly be striving for your way. You're going to be constantly striving for your way of thinking, which is not biblical. Biblical way of thinking. Sometimes we reduce biblical way of thinking. This is sometimes how we do it. And it's always really, and depending on your church tradition, some of you may understand what I'm saying here. Some of you may not. And some church traditions, God's ways are not our ways. Okay. So if we're going to go God's ways, then here's the list. Don't wear this, wear a tie, make sure your hair doesn't touch the collar. Women don't wear pants. Don't listen to rock and roll. Don't go here. Don't go there. That's God's ways. You need to change your ways. You need to change your thoughts about these things. And it's like, no. God's ways and God's thoughts go much deeper than a list of outward morality that we force others to abide by. It's going to a radical, complete transformation, a renewing of a mind that sees life through a completely different prism, a completely different perspective. Wherever you go, listen, whether you're at work, whether at school, in your own home, with your family, rarely does anyone walk around demonstrating this way of thinking and demonstrating this way, this paradox. Okay, I'm going to humble myself all day. I'm not going to exalt myself. I'm not going to do anything that could be perceiving as exalting self. I'm going to serve all. I'm going to serve everyone. I'm not going to grab onto my life, my fight, my right. No, I'm going to lose my life. Okay, I'm gonna find rest by taking on a yoke. I'm gonna realize that every day I have the yoke of Christ upon me. What does that mean? I'm gonna conquer by yielding myself. I'm gonna conquer by yielding, not by fighting. I'm going to be a slave. I'm going to be a slave. I'm going to find freedom by being a slave. Those are radical things. This is just not a little list just to get an hour of teaching in. This is a list that is of great significance. And I've been kind of just struggling with it for a couple of days, just trying to wrap my head around it. And I'm trying to present, if you see what I've got in front of me, they just list them. They're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and that's it. They don't say anything about any one of them. And so it's really, they placed it there for you to figure out its significance, you to figure out its importance. And I've been trying to figure it out. And I think there's a lot to meditate on and a lot to think about, but I'll leave it right there. All right. Yes, I'm going to actually finish early. See, look at that. I covered 21 things and finished early, right? 21 things I finished. 21. That's the story I'm going to tell everyone, that I finished 21 things in one sermon. And you said it couldn't. Okay, obviously that would be a lie, right? So But yeah. Yeah, that would be a lie. Obviously, I didn't finish it, but who cares? Who cares if I didn't finish it? What we care about is that you do something with those things. That's what I really want. I want you to really take those things and really think about them, really meditate on them, struggle with them, talk to each other about them, post them somewhere where you can remember them. If you go to work, post it somewhere where you work so you can see them, so you can be reminded, hey, this is the way I need to be thinking. This is the way I need to be seeing life. This is the perception I need. These are the glasses I need to wear so that I see things through my spiritual vision. We worry about our physical, our vision. We need a spiritual vision so we see things correctly. All right. Very important truths. So I'll stop right there. Have any comments, any questions, any thoughts, please post them in the chat. I will check it as soon as I finish right here. All right. Want to thank Patrick. Want to thank Mary and Elizabeth for their work on the church website. They created a new section that I thought would be helpful. It's just another way of allowing, we've got the pod pages, the VBC pod page. We got the Theology Central pod page. You can visit both of those by going to podpage.com/VBC, podpage.com/VBC. That's the VBC pod page. The Theology Central pod page, if I can talk right, is podpage.com/theology. Now, I know this is not very technical, but I'll just use this so that no one gets confused. Podpage.com/theology -central, right? I'm calling it a minus symbol so that when everyone looks at their device and tries to see what symbol I'm referring to, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about, all right? Podpage.com/theology -central. All right, you can check those pod pages out. Those are another way for people to find us, keep up with what we're doing. The Theology Central pod page has the blog, and I'm trying to post things on that blog at least once a day, something to listen to, something to consider. Sometimes it's information that I talked about in a podcast, and it's there. Like I did the podcast where we looked at the writings of J.C. Ryle in regards to the great cattle plague of England in the 1800s. I put his entire writing there so that you can read it for yourself. So I'll do that. I did some study in the Heidelberg Catechism. I put that section there as well. And then sometimes it's just a link to an audio message, sermon, theological discussion from all kinds of sources that I think will be a benefit to you. If you listen to anything, you want to discuss it, talk about it, use the chat. That's why it's there. It's there for the church to speak to one another, talk to one another, talk about Scripture. And anyone in the church chat, don't just leave it to me to post something. If you got something you think is interesting, post it. It doesn't matter if it's a news article, doesn't matter what it is. Feel free to share there. Share whatever it is. If you want to take a picture of what you're having for supper, post it there, okay? Because we know people love to talk about what people are eating, right? Well, social media is filled with people taking pictures of their food. I don't care, okay? Post it there. We want it to be used, all right? The Slack channel was for the church to communicate, right? Because there's always that feeling that we show up here, everybody says hi, and then everybody walks out the door and everybody speaks to each other the rest of the week. The Slack channel is designed to try to fix that. So please, please, please use it. Use it for something, right? Instead of just me posting stuff all day, right? Okay, that sounds good? All right, hope so. And if you got any ideas to make the Slack channel more beneficial, let me know. I typically, if I record a podcast, I don't post the link in the Slack channel. I don't. If you want me to, I can start posting a link to it if you need me to do that. So you're probably going, no, we don't want you to. I got you. I understand. All right. I have been posting some of the blog articles from the pod page there. So if you want me to do that, let me know. All right. Thank you. I know this is crazy doing church this way. But we've got to be prepared. It could be a couple of more weeks. So please pray. And again, if you need something, let us know. Please pray that the church has everything we need so that we're able to continue to move forward. Thank you for all the support. Thank you for participating in the chat. Thank you for listening. I know it's going to get easy the longer we continue to do this, that you're not going to want to come back to church. I pray, please, you don't get this mindset that, hey, once this is over, I never need to go back to church. I'll just listen from home. No, we need to come together. We need to gather as a body, a visible body. We talked about that. I think the New Testament, when it speaks of the church, it speaks of it in a visible way. All the letters of the New Testament written to churches. Pastors were given to churches, visible bodies coming together for the Lord's table. So I pray that I pray that hopefully when this is all said and done, you will have maybe a greater appreciation for the church, a greater longing for the church, and it will benefit maybe your appreciation for the church even more. I am grateful for technology that allows us to do this, and I'm grateful that when people can't be here, that they can listen live or listen to it immediately after. But let's continue to pray for the church through this, pray for each other. Remember tomorrow, the press conference. Be prepared for a possible shelter in place. Make sure you've got the things you need for your family. You may want to take care of that tonight if you need to. If there's something you need and you can't get, let me know. We'll find a way to get it to you as soon as possible. If you have a health problem and you're concerned about going somewhere, let me know. If I need to, I'll go get it for you, all right? So look out for one another, check on one another, pray for one another, pray for our country, pray for our president, and pray for all the medical and first responders who have to constantly be placing themselves right in front of this virus. Pray for all of them as well. All right. Thank you. Have a great night, a great week. God bless.